This is a Sharp model XL-DH259. This is what's referred to as a micro component system. It's a miniaturized stereo system with all of the features of a larger component-based system, all in one neat little package for people who are pressed for space. And everything works with it. I've already gone ahead and tested it prior to this video. The only problem is that this speaker grill, I guess, somehow in transit to the recyclers, got messed about and ended up breaking off the two plastic pegs that slide into these rubber grommets that hold this speaker grill in place. It's no big deal. I'll just glue them or do something. I'm not too sure. I haven't figured it out just yet. And the little promotional sticker is still affixed all these years later. It claims 160 watts of total output power. I think that's being a bit optimistic. I don't think you could do anything close to that. USB playback, audio in. It's a 3.5mm stereo jack and made for iPod. It's got an iPod connection up here. Of course, the older style connector, not the newer lightning connector. And I think that's probably why the people threw this thing out, because the iPod dock no longer works. So the only way you can get music from any kind of an audio player, any kind of an iPod that is by using the 3.5mm stereo line-in jack that's on the front. And you can also listen to it using the 3.5mm stereo headphone jack, which is a nice bonus. And these speakers are rated 80 watts at 4 ohms. It's got a 4 3/4 inch woofer and a 2-inch tweeter. And they're made in Malaysia. And this is a real tweeter. It's not one of those fake ones that they put in a lot of stereo systems these days to fool you. You get a woofer and a tweeter, and very high fidelity speakers at that, just using regular speaker cable, not RCA jacks, which was common with the older 1970s era stereo receivers. Oh, and in case anyone's wondering how I'm finally getting lighting pointing this direction, it's thanks to this broken Sony Handycam's halogen spotlight. So you have a remote sensor, a timer, and then the LCD display, which has a few unused characters like a 5 CD disc changer. There was actually a model that had a huge disc changer in it. Of course, it was a larger sized unit, so they recycled this LCD display. MP3 and WMA playback, which this can do. RDS, which unfortunately this does not have the capability to do so. It'd be pretty nice if it could display RDS data from FM radio stations. And the thing that's probably the most interesting is the record indicator up here. I suppose that there is a model of this sort of stereo receiver that allows you to record perhaps FM radio to either the CD or, more likely, the USB jack. An unfortunate trend that I'm noticing with a lot of stereo systems and other electronic devices is the constant obsession with hiding the majority of important features and functions, allowing you only to access them via the remote control. For example, on the front side of this, all we have is the power button, a function button, which will allow us to change between the FM and AM tuner, the USB jack, the audio input, and finally the iPod connector, a play and pause button, a stop, and an eject button. That's all you get. So thankfully the recyclers didn't decide to throw this thing out prematurely. This is a Sharp model. Well, that's quite a long model number, but there you go. Remote control that does work with this unit, and the batteries are still good in it, thankfully. And you can see that there are a whole slew of functions and features that are not available through the the buttons on the actual thing. You have to use the remote control, such as equalizer mode, X bass, bass and treble, and other functions and controls as well. And turning around this unit, we have a composite video output for your iPod. I believe that this has the capability to actually output video from your iPod to a composite video source, such as an analog TV or even a newer LCD TV, providing it has a composite input. And you have your traditional speaker connections here as well. And then not only does it have an FM antenna hookup, but also an external AM antenna hookup, which is certainly something that you don't see very often on stereo receivers. AM is pretty much an afterthought. The only problem is that they use this push-on F-type coaxial connector, which is very common outside of the United States, but inside the United States most people are familiar and accustomed to using the screw-on F-type connector. So I have to buy an adapter, but at least they give you an AM antenna hookup. That's pretty nice. And yes, this can tune into the extended AM band all the way up to 1720 kilohertz. And I also got the external AM loop antenna, but it's missing the actual wires, so I'll have to make my own. And I'm a bit curious as to how you're intended to actually mount this. I don't think it's supposed to be mounted to the actual stereo, but perhaps maybe the back of a cabinet or something like that, because there's really no way for you to affix this to this. Now time for an audio demonstration. Here I have a CD. Remember when Lennons and things used to be around? Well, they released a compilation CD. Believe me when I say this, but I do not have this at a very loud volume. I have this at a very conservative volume. And it is still vibrating the floor with the bass from these two speakers. I want to be careful. The first time I made a video on this thing, I uploaded it to YouTube and it got flagged for copyright infringement, so I have to be very conservative with the music demonstrations. The only problem with this CD player is it's beginning to skip. The laser's dirty and needs to be cleaned, and of course now that I'm videotaping, it's not going to do it. And now to demonstrate the 3.5mm stereo line input, I have my broken iPod Touch here. This is like a second or third generation, I don't even know, it's that old. Playing a certain song by Nigel Olsson, Little Bit of Soap from 1979. Now, like I said earlier, the iPod jack does not work. If I connect this up here, you could hear that it picks up and it is charging, but if I try to play anything from it, there's no audio. Even if I turn it all the way up, there's nothing getting through. So the only thing it's good for is charging your iPod.
Remember when you swore you'd never get married?
Well, I'm just using that same 3.5mm adapter cable, and it's actually working perfectly as an antenna. I'm able to receive this channel 104.3 in stereo. You can see that the indicator lights up, and if you press the function button again, it converts it over to mono to get rid of all that static and multipath. I gotta say, it's really a pain trying to change frequencies with this thing, especially when you want to go from the bottom all the way to the top of the dial. It takes an incredibly long time to actually do it. You gotta keep pressing this. Now if you notice, you just heard a relay click. That happens every time you plug it in, disconnect it, or turn on the power using this button. The light's even dim for a brief moment. Let's see if we get anything on AM.
As mavericks or people to be done away with after the election.
Well, I think the latter, given the track record of the Clintons and their...
So, it's not a bad stereo system, I just don't have any room for it. Even this being a micro system, I just can't seem to find any room for it. And I have a perfectly good pair of Harman Kardon speakers for my computer, which is all I really need, so I'll probably be selling this soon.